additional points for every person. So I'm going to set this in the middle again so that
You should put a picture of Arrowhead on there, right?
Yeah.
Use the stadium.
well, I'll say fellow Toastmasters, then you can go. Okay, you're good. Fellow Toastmasters, quote, education is not just about going to school and getting a degree. It's about widening your knowledge and absorbing the truth about life, end quote. Today, public education is not as insistent on widening our knowledge as it should be. Rather, it has a tendency at times to narrow and restrict your knowledge a little bit, keeping you from absorbing the truths about life. Specifically, this takes place in the science classroom, specifically with theories of the origins of life. Ideas of evolution are welcomed and promoted in the science classroom, but other ideas are pushed to the side and not as welcome. This is the problem in today's education system. Evolution is kind of known as the only way. Everything else is, again, ignored. This is the problem, but we need to go about solving this, and we are able to, and that's what we want to look at today. That public schools should promote other ideas, other alternatives to evolution, such as intelligent design, and that should be presented as well in the classroom. And of course, what comes to your mind is, why? Why should we go about doing this? Why should this be the proposal of today? And I have 4 reasons for this. 2 relate to scientific theory in general. 1 relates to our teachers, and the 4th and final point will relate to our students and why this is what we should push in the education system. First, relating to scientific inquiry is that evolution is not science. This is something I spent time here discussing a few weeks ago. I won't go into the details of it, but science, and there's plenty of ways you can define science, but science must be observable, testable, and repeatable. And we cannot observe the process of macroevolution, the process of animals turning from one kind into a completely different kind. We can't observe that. We cannot test that in the lab, nor can we repeat the process in the lab, which means that at a bare bones understanding, evolution is not science. That doesn't mean evolution is wrong, it doesn't mean it's incorrect, but it simply means that evolution is simply an interpretation of evidence. And if evolution is simply an interpretation of evidence, then that means it's something that we can't prove, and that means that no matter how much time you give it, we'll never be able to completely confirm that evolution is correct. Now, the reason that this is important is because people try to keep intelligent design out of the classroom under the claim that it is not science. Agreed. Intelligent design, that theory is not science, but neither is evolution science. And if all interpretations aren't science, then any interpretation should be allowed to be presented in the classroom. If someone has one interpretation, there's other interpretations that are out there, they should all be presented. But why should we present intelligent design in the classroom? There's a couple of reasons. First of all, intelligent design is relatively popular in our society. 51% of Americans doubt one of the main ideas of evolution, which is the Big Bang. And a sizable amount of Americans, 38%, hold to the creationist view of origins. They hold to some idea of intelligent design. It's not the majority of Americans, but it's a good chunk of the population that should be represented in the school system. So intelligent design is relatively popular. But secondly, intelligent design is a reasonable interpretation of science. Consider the watchmaker argument. I've mentioned this last time as well. But the watchmaker argument suggests that if you were to be walking by yourself through a field and come across a watch, a well-designed working watch that was telling the correct time, you would assume that somebody made this watch. You wouldn't come to the conclusion, oh, this watch just sprung up out of the ground, or this watch just showed up through random chance or selection or what have you. In the same way, just like we would come to that conclusion with a watch, with things that are more intricate, more complex, and more impressive than a watch, like the human brain, like various organisms in the natural world, we should reasonably conclude someone made that. So it's a reasonable conclusion to come to. Again, just because that's a reasonable conclusion doesn't mean it's correct, but just because evolution is popular doesn't mean it's correct either. There are various interpretations that should be presented equally in both school system. Now, I want you to look at this map briefly. Now, the details of it aren't that important, but these are the schools. The dots represent schools in the United States where it is okay to discuss intelligent design. There's 2 states, Tennessee and Louisiana, that allow it. The other dots represent other publicly funded schools. Some of them are charter schools, some of them are more private schools, but those are places where intelligent design is allowed to be taught. But other states, it's not allowed to be taught. In fact, it is very restricted in some areas, and that's what I want to look at now, that teachers don't have the freedom to talk about this. I want to give you 2 quick examples of education systems in general. Ball State University in Indiana does not allow intelligent design to be taught in the curriculum. That's according to the Huffington Post. And according to Fox News, the Michigan Board of Education approved a curriculum that banned intelligent design from being taught in the state science classrooms. But another thing, just to get more personal with the teachers, is that teachers are losing their jobs because of intelligent design. John Freshwater was fired for allegedly criticizing evolution. He lost his job as a teacher. Mark Armitage was fired because he came across some evidence that suggested that the Earth was younger than what evolutionists promote. And he presented that evidence countering evolution, and he was fired. A non-teacher in Texas who worked for the Texas Education Agency informed his management, informed personnel at the agency that a speaker was coming to talk about the history of intelligent design. He informed personnel at the organization, and he was fired for mentioning that. And then finally, Dr. Nancy Byron was forced to resign after giving a presentation called Critical Thinking on Evolution. And this is what she said after that incident. Quote, "The academy is all about free thought and academic freedom. But the person who fired me hasn't even heard my talk. Without knowing anything about my talk, he made that decision. I think it's just really an outrage." And things like this are unfair. And I don't mean to make the claim that if you dare mention intelligent design in the classroom, you're going to lose your job. But I am pointing out that these things are happening in the country. And this is not fair to our teachers. Teachers should have their First Amendment rights in the classroom. They should be allowed to teach things, and especially when it comes to ideas that are simply interpretation. They should be able to say, here's an evolutionary interpretation, here's another popular interpretation that's called intelligent design. Kids, you make your own decision. And that leads into the 4th point here, that our children are better off if they are presented with some of these ideas. First and foremost, they're able to hear a variety of interpretations. They get to hear the evolutionary side. They get to hear some other side, the intelligent design option. And they're able to hear those and weigh the evidence of those. And the second point, they're able to evaluate them and use critical thinking skills to decide what makes sense, what is most backed up by the evidence. Teacher can ask you about this side. Teacher can ask you about this side of the argument. They're able to engage the topic better than just, oh, well, this is what I have to accept because it's the only thing that's allowed to be taught. And then third, they are exposed to the idea of God. The idea of God is something that was a founding factor in this country and has been part of our culture for centuries. Children deserve to understand that, to know about that, and to know that a lot of people do hold and submit to this idea, and that there is a certain amount of scientific backing for intelligent design. So our children are better off when they are exposed to these things. To conclude then, this is a problem that we need to solve. We are exposed, we are in a culture where the education system promotes only one interpretation at the expense of leaving out others, at the expense of restricting teachers, at the expense of costing teachers their job, and at the expense of harming a child's education by giving them very restricted viewpoints. So what do we need to do about it? We need to speak out about this. That's why I want to talk about it today and present it to you so that we can be aware of it. But some of us have direct influence in the school system. Some of us are teachers or were teachers or no principals or no members of the school board. Some of us have the opportunity to vote for school board members, to vote on certain curriculum, to vote on certain school options. And so we need to be proponents of letting schools push this idea of at least allowing intelligent design to be presented in the school system. And then finally, we need to discuss the issue with people we know, with people that we interact with, that we can intelligently talk about this idea and push for its promotion. Our country was built on freedom of thought. Such freedom and thoughtful inquiry should not be held back, should not be pushed down, especially in our halls of learning.